You have been praying the same prayer for 15 years, maybe longer. You started with expectation. You believed God heard you. You trusted that breakthrough was coming. But 15 years later, you are still waiting. And somewhere in the quiet moments, when no one else is listening, you have wondered if there is an expiration date on God's promises. You have wondered if you missed your moment, if you prayed wrong, if you believed too hard or not hard enough, if God changed his mind about you. This is not a message about breakthrough coming tomorrow. This is not about 7 steps to activate God's favor. This is about what happens in you when tomorrow looks exactly like yesterday, when the wait stretches longer than you thought possible, when you have done everything right and still find yourself in a season that was supposed to be over by now. Because the truth no one prepared you for is this: God's promises do not expire, but they do not always arrive on your timeline. And learning to live in that tension may be the most important spiritual work you do in this season of your life. You are not alone in this. You are standing in a long line of people who believed God and then had to keep believing when nothing changed. Abraham waited 25 years for a son. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before his calling began. Joseph sat in prison for years after God gave him dreams of leadership. David was anointed king as a teenager and spent the next decade running for his life. These were not people who lacked faith. They were people whose faith was tested by time. And if you read their stories carefully, you will notice something. God never apologized for the wait. He never explained why it took so long. He simply remained faithful to what he promised, even when the fulfillment looked nothing like they imagined. That is where you are right now, in the gap between promise and fulfillment, in the space between what God said and what you can see. And this space is not empty. It is not wasted. It is not punishment for something you did wrong. This space is where faith becomes real, where trust moves from theory to practice, where you discover whether you love God for what he gives you or for who he is. But let me be honest with you about something. The wait changes you. It has to. You cannot stay the same person for 15 years of unanswered prayer. You cannot hold on to the same version of faith you had when you first started believing. The wait either deepens you or embitters you. It either refines your understanding of God or distorts it. And which direction you go depends on what you do with the questions that come in the dark, because the questions will come. You have already asked some of them. Why is this taking so long? What is God waiting for? Did I misunderstand what he promised? Is this delay a no? How much longer am I supposed to hold on? These are not doubts. These are the questions of someone who has believed long enough to know that faith is not simple. Someone who has walked with God through enough seasons to recognize that his ways are not always clear. Someone who is tired of pretending that waiting is easy. So let me tell you what I have learned from people who have waited well. People who held on when everything in them wanted to let go. People who came out the other side with their faith intact. They learned to distinguish between what God promised and what they assumed. They learned to separate his character from his timeline. They learned that delay is not the same as denial. And they learned that sometimes the greatest miracle is not getting what you prayed for. It is becoming someone who can steward it well when it finally arrives. Think about Abraham again. God promised him a son. That was the promise. Clear, specific, undeniable. But Abraham assumed the promise came with a timeline. He assumed it would happen while he was young enough to enjoy it, while Sarah was still able to conceive naturally, while it still made sense according to human logic. And when year after year passed with no son, Abraham began to wonder if he needed to help God out. He took matters into his own hands with Hagar. He tried to force the promise to fit his timeline, and the result was Ishmael. A son, yes, but not the son of promise, not the fulfillment God intended. Here's what that story teaches us. You can get so tired of waiting that you settle for a version of the promise that fits your schedule. You can convince yourself that close enough is good enough, that maybe you misunderstood, that maybe this lesser thing is what God meant all along. But deep down, you know. You know when something is Ishmael and when something is Isaac. You know when you are forcing it and when God is doing it. And the tragedy is not that Ishmael exists. The tragedy is that Abraham spent years managing the consequences of his impatience when he could have been resting in God's faithfulness. You may be there right now, tempted to manufacture your own version of breakthrough, tempted to make something happen because waiting has become unbearable. And I am not going to tell you that is always wrong. Sometimes God uses our human effort. Sometimes he invites us to partner with him in bringing things to pass. But there is a difference between partnering with God and bypassing him. There is a difference between faithful action and faithless manipulation. And you know the difference. You can feel it. One brings peace. The other brings anxiety. One flows from trust. The other flows from fear. The wait is revealing something in you that you would never have seen otherwise. It is showing you what you really believe about God. Not what you say you believe, not what you sing about on Sunday mornings, but what you believe when you have been faithful for decades and still do not have what you prayed for. It is showing you whether you trust God's character or just his blessings, whether you follow him because of where he is leading or because of what he is providing, whether your faith can survive disappointment. And here's the thing about disappointment. It is not the opposite of faith. It is the proof that you believe something real enough to be let down when it did not happen. Disappointment means you hoped, you expected, you trusted. And now you are wrestling with the gap between what you believed for and what you received. That wrestling is not sin. It is not weak faith. It is what happens when finite people try to understand an infinite God. When time-bound creatures try to make sense of a timeless being. When we want answers, and God offers presence instead. Job understood this. He lost everything in a single day. His children, his wealth, his health, his reputation, everything except his life and his wife, who told him to curse God and die. And Job did what anyone would do. He demanded answers. He wanted to know why. He laid out his case before God like a lawyer in a courtroom. He insisted that he deserved an explanation. And do you remember what God said when he finally showed up? Nothing. He said nothing about the reasons. He did not explain the why. He simply revealed himself. He reminded Job who he was. And somehow, that was enough. That is what happens in the long wait. You stop demanding explanations and start encountering God. You stop needing to understand and start learning to trust. Not because you suddenly have clarity, but because you have seen enough of God's faithfulness in other areas to believe He is faithful in this one too, even when you cannot see it, even when it makes no sense, even when everyone around you is telling you to give up. But let me address something that no one talks about: the jealousy you feel when someone else gets their breakthrough, when someone who started praying after you gets their answer before you, when God moves quickly for them and slowly for you, when their testimony becomes your trigger. You smile and say congratulations. You celebrate with them publicly. But privately, you are asking God, why them and not me? Why now for them and still not yet for me? This is one of the hardest parts of the long wait, watching others receive what you have been praying for, watching God move in their timing while you are still in yours. And the temptation is to believe that God loves them more, that He hears them better, that they did something right, that you did wrong. But that is not how God works. His timing is not a reward system. His delays are not punishments. He is working in your life according to what you need, not according to what you see in someone else's story. Rachel understood this. She watched her sister Leah have child after child while her own womb remained closed. She begged Jacob to give her children. She said if she could not have children, she would die. She made it her entire identity, her whole worth. And Jacob, frustrated, asked her the question she needed to hear. Am I in the place of God? He was not being cruel. He was pointing her back to the one who opens and closes wombs, the one who gives and withholds according to purposes we cannot always see. Eventually, Rachel had children, Joseph first, then Benjamin. But if you read the story carefully, you realize something. God did not wait because Rachel was unworthy. He waited because Joseph needed to be born at a specific time. Joseph, who would save nations. Joseph, who would preserve the family line. Joseph, whose timing was tied to purposes bigger than Rachel's personal pain. The delay was not about her. It was about a plan she could not see yet. Your delay may not be about you either. It may be about someone else's story that intersects with yours. It may be about timing that makes no sense now, but will make perfect sense later. It may be about a version of you that needs to exist before the promise can be fulfilled. And that is the hardest truth to accept. That God is not withholding to punish you. He is waiting to prepare you. He is developing something in you that cannot be developed any other way. Consider David, anointed king at maybe 15 years old, full of passion and promise, favored by God, victorious over Goliath, celebrated by the nation, and then everything fell apart. Saul turned on him. David spent years hiding in caves, running for his life, leading a ragtag group of misfits, wondering if Samuel got it wrong, if the anointing was a mistake, if he would ever actually sit on the throne. But here is what those years did. They stripped David of entitlement. They taught him dependence. They surrounded him with people who were broken and desperate just like him. They gave him empathy for the outcast. They showed him what it felt like to be hunted and betrayed and misunderstood. And when he finally became king, he was not the same person who got anointed in his father's house. He was someone who could lead with mercy, someone who understood suffering, someone who knew that the throne was not a prize to be earned, but a responsibility to be stewarded. That is what the wait is doing in you. It is stripping away entitlement. It is teaching you that God's favor is not about your comfort. It is about His purposes. It is showing you that what you thought you needed may not be what you actually need, that the version of breakthrough you have been praying for may not be the version God has planned. And learning to trust Him with that difference is the deepest level of faith. You are being prepared for something. You may not know what yet. You may not see how any of this connects. But God does not waste time. He does not waste pain. He does not waste seasons of obscurity and waiting. He is always working, always shaping, always moving toward fulfillment, even when you cannot track His progress. And the fact that you are still here, still believing, still trusting after all this time is not a sign of your weakness. It is a sign of His faithfulness in you. But I also need to say this. Some promises do not get fulfilled the way we think they will. Some prayers get answered with no instead of yes. Some seasons of waiting end not with breakthrough, but with redirection. And that does not mean God lied. It means we misunderstood, or it means circumstances changed, or it means God had a better plan that we could not see from where we were standing. Moses is the clearest example of this. He led Israel for 40 years through the wilderness. He endured their complaints. He interceded for them. He gave everything to get them to the promised land. And then at the very end, God told him, "No. You will not enter. You will see it from a distance, but you will not walk in it." And Moses could have spent his final days bitter, angry, feeling cheated, but he did not. He blessed the people. He passed the leadership to Joshua. He worshiped God on the mountain, and he trusted that God's no was still wrapped in God's faithfulness. That is maturity. That is the kind of faith that comes from years of walking with God. The ability to accept that not every promise unfolds the way you expected. The ability to trust God's heart, even when you do not understand His hand. The ability to worship on the mountain, even when you're not getting what you thought you deserved. You may be facing that right now. The possibility that this thing you have prayed for, believed for, waited for may not happen. At least not the way you envisioned. And if that is where you are, let me say this gently. Your faith is not measured by whether you get what you prayed for. It is measured by whether you trust God when you do not. It is measured by whether you can still say He is good when life is hard, whether you can still worship when nothing makes sense, whether you can still believe He loves you when He says no. Because here is the truth that sustains you in the long wait. God is not trying to make your life easy. He is trying to make your faith real. He is not interested in your comfort. He is interested in your character. He is not concerned with your timeline. He is concerned with your transformation. And sometimes the greatest gift He gives is not the answered prayer. It is the person you become while you are waiting. Think about the disciples. They followed Jesus for 3 years. They watched Him heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons. They believed He was the Messiah, the one who would restore Israel, the one who would overthrow Rome, the one who would establish His kingdom. And then He was arrested, beaten, crucified. And everything they believed fell apart. The promise died on a cross. The hope was buried in a tomb. And for 3 days they hid, confused, devastated, wondering if they had wasted 3 years of their lives. But on the third day, everything changed. The promise did not die. It was transformed. The kingdom did come, just not the way they expected. And the resurrection was not just about Jesus coming back to life. It was about them seeing that God's plans are bigger than human understanding. That delay is not denial. That death is not the end. That what looks like failure can be the setup for the greatest victory. You are in a Good Friday season right now. It looks like the promise died. It feels like the wait was for nothing. It seems like God forgot. But you do not know what Sunday is coming. You do not know what resurrection is around the corner. You do not know what God is preparing that will make all of this make sense. So what do you do while you wait? You stay faithful in the small things. You keep showing up when no one is watching. You keep praying, even when it feels like words disappearing into void. You keep serving even when you are tired. You keep believing even when circumstances say you are foolish. Because faithfulness in the waiting is not about what you get. It is about who you become. You stop measuring God's love by your circumstances. You stop evaluating His faithfulness by your timeline. You stop assuming that delay means rejection. And you start recognizing favor in forms you did not expect. The strength to endure another day. The friend who calls at the exact right moment. The peace that does not make sense given what you are walking through. The grace to choose gratitude when you have every reason to be bitter. That is favor too. Not the kind that gets celebrated. Not the kind that makes for powerful testimonies, but the kind that sustains you. The kind that keeps you standing when everything in you wants to quit. The kind that transforms you from the inside out. And maybe that is the real promise all along. Not that God will give you what you want when you want it, but that He will give you Himself, His presence, His peace, His strength, His grace, and that He will use even the waiting, even the disappointment, even the unanswered prayers, to make you more like Jesus. Because Jesus knows what it is like to pray prayers that do not get answered the way you hoped. In the Garden of Gethsemane, He asked God to remove the cup, to find another way, to spare Him from the cross. And God said no, not because He did not love Jesus, but because the cross was the only way to accomplish what needed to be accomplished. And Jesus trusted that. He surrendered to it. He walked into suffering because He trusted that God's no was wrapped in a greater yes. You are being invited into that same trust. The trust that says God knows what He is doing, even when you do not. The trust that says His timeline is perfect, even when it feels impossibly long. The trust that says He is working everything together for good, even when you cannot see how. This is not easy. No one is pretending it is. The long wait tests everything you believe. It exposes every weak spot in your theology. It reveals every area where you are trusting your own understanding instead of leaning on His. And that exposure is painful. But it is also necessary. Because you cannot build a deep faith on shallow roots. You cannot develop spiritual maturity without spiritual testing. You cannot know what you truly believe until what you believe gets challenged. So if you are tired, you are not alone. If you are confused, you are not wrong. If you are disappointed, you are not failing. You are human. And God is not surprised by any of it. He does not need you to pretend you are okay when you are not. He does not need you to fake certainty when you are full of questions. He does not need you to perform strength when you are running on empty. What He needs is your honesty, your willingness to keep showing up even when you do not understand. Your decision to trust his character even when you cannot trace his hand. Your choice to believe that he is good even when life is hard. And here is what I know after watching people walk through long seasons of waiting. The ones who come out stronger are not the ones who never doubted. They are the ones who doubted honestly, who brought their questions to God instead of running from him, who wrestled like Jacob and held on until blessing came, who let the wait refine them instead of define them. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. You are not being forgotten. You are being formed. You are not being overlooked. You are being developed for something that requires this exact season of waiting. And one day when you look back, you will see that the wait was not wasted. It was necessary. It was purposeful. It was the very thing that made you ready for what came next. So keep walking. Keep trusting. Keep believing. Not because you see breakthrough coming, but because you have seen enough of God's faithfulness to know he does not start something he will not finish. He does not call you to something he will not equip you for. He does not make promises he will not keep. The wait is long, but God is faithful. The timeline is unclear, but his character is sure. The outcome is unknown, but his presence is constant. And that is enough. Not because it feels like enough, but because he is enough. And learning to rest in that truth, to live in that reality, to anchor your hope in his unchanging nature instead of your changing circumstances. That is what transforms waiting from a burden into a gift. You may not see the outcome you have been praying for in the timeline you hoped for, but you have seen something even more important. You have seen that God does not abandon his people in the waiting. He meets them there. He sustains them there. He refines them there. And if you are still standing after everything you have walked through, that is not just resilience. That is favor. The kind that does not make headlines. The kind that does not get celebrated in success stories, but the kind that lasts. The kind that transforms. The kind that one day you will look back on and realize was exactly what you needed, even when it was not at all what you wanted. Trust that. Rest in that. And keep walking forward in that.